On today's episode, we're going to get down to the nuts and bolts of corona, what you need to know, how to protect yourself, and what treatments you might consider. Craichy. Welcome to the SuperHealth podcast. This is Craichy. Today, we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the corona situation and information you can use. So I'm going to go back now some 9 weeks approximately. I don't see a date on this. When I wrote this article that has gotten so much attention. And so every day since, we have posted more links and comments about what is going on, and not about politics and conspiracy theories and that sort of thing, all of which may be true. That's not the point of this. The point of this is information you can use that is actionable. So for your family, for yourself, to protect yourself, to know what kind of treatments actually work and where the problems are. So we're just going to do a quick review today, and not so quick, but we're going to do a review. So going back to the article, you can find it at Living Fuel, and then at Living Fuel, at the very top, you'll see a red banner. You click the red banner that says COVID-19, and you'll come to this article. This health alert, coronavirus is at the end of the world, how to protect yourself, updated daily. So this was weeks ago. And so when you go down here and just skim through it, it talks about, of course, what coronavirus is and that sort of thing. But by now you've figured that out. But the point that I wanted to make here again is that healthy people rarely get sick and recover quickly when they do. I have a paragraph on that, and it's super important. And so to avoid coronavirus, yes, you hear about washing your hands, and that makes sense. And some other of this, of not getting near people, coughing on people, sneezing on people, yes, that makes sense, but that's not what this is about. My belief is it is your immune system that's going to dictate whether or not you have a real problem. Now, a lot of people get sick with this and they recover. Some don't even know if they're sick. And some, they say, are asymptomatic carriers. Now, I question that there's as many as they say there are, because the testing is flawed. But we'll get into that some more in a little while. So there are foods that suppress immunity. This article goes into, we talk about sugar. We've talked about that on previous shows. But sugar depresses immunity, as does high glycemic carbohydrates when they're not balanced with other foods as well. So how does sugar bring immunity down? Sugar drops what's called the leukocytic index, which is essentially how many pathogens a single white blood cell can consume over a period of an hour. And ideally, they say around 13 or 14 is a very good number for immunity. But if you have 100 grams of carbohydrates, say a pizza meal, and you sit down to that pizza meal, within 15 minutes, your immunity starts to drop. In other words, the leukocytic index drops from 13 down to as low as 1.8. 1.8, about a 90% drop. So essentially, you've blasted your immunity for a several hour period. So within 15 minutes, it starts to drop, and it stays down for several hours. So why is this important? Because it is not always about just coming in contact with new viruses that cause you problems and sickness and cold and flu and coronavirus and all the other things. It is that your immunity has kept stuff in check. And as we used the analogy in the past, is that while your immune system is high, it's like a wall. And you may have viruses or even cancer, but as long as that wall is up, you're good. But when you lower the wall, you allow pathogens to have their way. And that is what we want to avoid. We have susceptibility, that is, are we susceptible to get a virus? And then we have sensitivity or virility of the virus. So virility of the virus is how pathogenic does it become. So we're backing up to the process. So what is a virus and how does it work? A virus usually sets up in the throat, in the nose, in the eyes, or even in the lower ear canal. And this happens for 3 to 4 days. And so a focus on first sign of symptoms is really important in any cold and flu season, but particularly now when you have something that is potentially lethal if you are on the vulnerable population. So there's a lot of ways to keep that part of you clean. So you can gargle with vinegar. You can gargle with colloidal silver. You can gargle with Listerine, and that helps the throat part, which obviously the sinus and the ear comes down to the throat. But then also bubbling your ears. Have you ever heard of the swimmer's ear method, where you go swimming and years ago your parents would have you put hydrogen peroxide directly in your ear, let it bubble for a few minutes, and then pour it out and do the other one? This is also a very effective way to neutralize any virus in the ear canal. And also now for the nasal passages, there are multiple things. You can do spray silver. You can it has a spray in it, colloidal silver. You can put a saline solution, or even do a saline flush with a neti pot of your nasal passages, and also xylitol. There's xylitol nasal spray, and xylitol sticks to pathogens and pulls them out. So there are multiple things. Now, also, according to the research, getting in a sauna at greater than 133 degrees, say 150, for 15 minutes once or twice a day is very protective. And they even suggest that if you have the beginnings, first sign of symptoms, then do it for 15 minutes, 5 times a day. So there's not clinical research on that, but they do show that people that do sauna regularly actually have stronger immune systems, and that's what we're going for. So when you think about immunity and sickness, it's always the first sign of symptoms. There's certain drugs you can take out there. I'm no fan of the antivirals. What's it called? I'm trying to think of the name of the main antiviral for flu, but this also talks about it's more effective if you get a first sign of symptoms. There's a homeopathic version called oscillococcinum, and oscillococcinum works first sign of symptoms also, as do zinc lozenges, have been shown to reduce the severity and the duration of cold and flu. So zinc lozenges makes a lot of sense in this scenario. So these are the kind of things you need to keep in mind. Now, what are the supplements one would want to take first sign of symptoms? Actually, you really should be taking these before, because one of the points of my article that I made back then was that you must be properly nutrified in order to protect yourself. Many people with zinc deficiencies, vitamin D deficiencies, even magnesium deficiencies, multiple nutritional deficiencies, any one of which can make you open to being more susceptible and make the virus more viral. So these are very important little things I'm talking about. But the main thing is if you have a lifestyle of health, and you have a lifestyle where you don't eat a lot of sugar or white carbohydrates, and you have, in the article we talk about the 7 things that I generally always talk about: hydration, nutrition, exercise, stress, sleep, environmental hazards, and meditation and prayer. Now we can go through all those, and I'll touch on them in a minute. And hydration, you can't hydrate on soft drinks all the time. You can't hydrate on alcohol. You can't hydrate on a lot of the things people drink, sweet tea and Gatorade and all these sort of things. This is not going to hydrate you in a healthy way. So water, herbal teas, even electrolyte drinks with no flavoring help to hydrate if you're dehydrated. But otherwise, water is good as long as you get enough minerals in your diet. And herbal teas, organic coffee, these sort of things. It's the things you put in your drinks that can be really risky. Like in coffee, people put fake sugars, and they put creamers and made up things that aren't even real. Even milk. Milk is sugar. Keep that in mind. Lactose is sugar. So when you use regular milk, or even 2% or 1% or skim, you're getting lactose. What you want to get, if you're going to use less of it, but use like full cream, like half and half, organic, or coconut milk or cashew milk and those sort of things. Much better for you. I'm going over a lot of things here, but it's important for us to hear that the American diet is not going to cut it. If one wants to be at risk for being sick, and if you are sick, having serious complications, then continue the American diet. It is horrible. Now we're seeing inner city diets where basically they have fast food and soft drinks, and usually if it's a lower income area, usually they rely on carbohydrates, cheap carbohydrates, candies, things along those lines. That means they're not getting many of the essential nutrients, which means they're more at risk. And in the darker skin environments where people are black or dark skinned of any kind, they are notorious for having low vitamin D levels. And in the winter, most people have low vitamin D levels. So this is really important because vitamin D not only is the primary modulator of all immunity in the body, it also is one of the things that block what's called the cytokine storm. And the cytokine storm is a inflammatory reaction of the immune system that's trying to save the body, but it overwhelms the body and causes people to even to die. So having enough vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, and those sort of things will help modulate the cytokine storm. Even green tea, and there's another thing that I saw in Life Extension Foundation. But there are multiple things. If you have natural polyphenolic compounds, vegetables, greens, blueberries, raspberry, strawberry, cranberry, those sort of things. These are high nutrient foods, superfoods. Those things will build your health and not tear away at your health. So the things that are crackers and pizza and all those foods from the middle aisles of the stores that are in boxes, those are the ones that are problematic. So eating vegetables, clean meats being, beef and lamb and fish, but not farm-raised fish and not commercially raised beef and that sort of thing. That's why I say clean. Try to be organic, or what Publix calls it, green wise, so that you can not put pollutants in your body, because you don't want to give your body more to do. You want to have maximum immunity, maximum health, maximum respiration, maximum antioxidants, so that you can continue to be healthy. So going back to the article just to see what I missed here, but I want you to come to the article and read it yourself. We talk about the SuperHealth 7 keys, which I did talk about. Hydration, nutrition. It's about getting good stuff in and avoiding the donuts and the breads and those sort of things. Exercise is really important because exercise increases respiration, and having your lungs trained to take in lots of oxygen is a very important thing. And obviously, if you take in lots of oxygen, you need to make sure you have a lot of antioxidants in your body. So you don't want to overtrain, but training is very good because respiration is one of the things that's attacked with this virus. Get plenty of sleep. Sleep 8 hours a night is approximately right for most people. That sleep you recover when you sleep. Now, I will say that I interviewed one of the top epidemiologists in the world here recently regarding 5G and its health effects. And one of the things, also Dr. Lee Cowden was on the call as well in that interview. And what was interesting is that they both said that the youth that are sleeping, or a lot of people even older now, are sleeping with their phones by their bed, on their night table, under their pillow, their cell phones, and that is extremely dangerous. And the second thing is that Wi-Fi is on 24/7. I'm not even talking about 5G. 5G has its own set of problems. But I asked them at the end of the interview, I said, give me a 1 to 10. If 1 being no big deal and 10 being extremely important, urgently important, if for people to turn their phones off at night and to turn their Wi-Fi off at night. How important is that? They both, without question, gave me a 10 as the answer, and so does everyone else in the know. So sleeping with your electronics by your head is a bad idea. So keep in mind that the whole point about sleeping is growth and repair. The one thing that I learned in that interview that I never thought about is that Dr. Lee Cowden said that electronics at night cause you to be more in a beta brainwave. The beta brainwave is actually adrenal stress. In other words, it puts you in automatic fight or flight syndrome. And while you're in fight or flight, while you're in adrenal stress, you cannot be in growth and repair at the same time. So nighttime is all about growth and repair. And that's why one of the main reasons you want to avoid these harmful rays is because we get them all day long. And as long as we get a night's sleep that's in a dead zone for electromagnetic rays, then you can be a very healthy individual. But if you stay in fight or flight and you can't grow and repair, then that causes a lot of problems down the road and also radically drops your immunity. Now, one of the problems with 5G in hospitals, because hospitals are 5G environments a lot of the time, is that some of the robots servicing the patients, they have robots checking on the patients and checking machines and that sort of thing. But the robots are 5G robots. So if a patient is really sick and has got 5G right beside him, along with these other electromagnetic things all around them, then they cannot get into growth and repair. And so recovery becomes even more difficult in all of that, the electronic waves all the time. So I digress, but that would have been in the oh gosh, what I'm talking about. Oh, the hazards. Those are environmental hazards. That gave you electromagnetic pollution as one of the major environmental hazards. Another one is genetically modified foods. Another one is chemicals on your lawn, on your vegetables that you eat. And if you're not getting organic vegetables, Roundup has now been, or Monsanto has been sued for their chemical Roundup, which is glyphosate. And glyphosate is a dangerous chemical. Recently, a lawsuit was won against Monsanto by a gardener who used Roundup for years, and it caused cancer. And he was able to prove that he did, and he got a $285 million settlement. Many more lawsuits are now on their way for that. So be careful about consuming Roundup / glyphosate. And that's just a couple of the many environmental hazards that we need to pay attention to. They're in my book, The SuperHealth Diet, The Last Diet You Ever Need. They're also at livingfuel.com, and you can find out more about it. But do your own research and start realizing that these are not benign things. And you start adding them all together: sleep deprivation, poor nutrition, poor hydration, high stress, because stress is at the root of most every disease, poor sleep, and high environmental hazards, and no meditation and prayer, and you start seeing that it is exceptionally detrimental to human health. So that's in the article there. It's in a lot of the writings I have for many years. My wife and I talk about that very frequently because it's still true. It's always been true, and it's still true. So the power of coronavirus is fear. Fear. The word of God says that God has not given you a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, love, and a sound mind. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Watch the mainstream news, get fearful, start acting out of fear, and then you bring about a self-fulfilling prophecy. That alone can drop your immunity, increase your stress, increase your cortisol, drop your immunity. So do not fear. It's time for the fearless people to rise up. Now, the probability of you getting taken out by coronavirus is exceedingly low. And if you do the things we're talking about here, it's even lower because, again, healthy people don't get sick, but rarely. And if so, for a very short period of time. I had something early in the year, January. I never get sick, but I got busted. I was sore. All the symptoms they talk about from coronavirus, I had, but in 4 days, I was at 100% because I know what to do. I have a very strong immune system. I take Living Fuel every day. I have my antioxidants. I have all the things I'm talking to you about now. I focus on those, and I minimize things like sugar and fried foods and burnt oils and toxic packaged foods that I've been telling you about. So super important. So your faith is stronger than the coronavirus. And ultimately, all healing comes from God. And the section that I passed over, the meditation and prayer. Duke University did a study about 20 years ago called the Mantra Project, where apparently they were trying to disprove prayer, and they had patients on a cardiac surgery list. Half of them they put on prayer lists worldwide and did not tell the patients, and the other half they didn't. And the patients on the prayer list came out with 50% less side effects from the surgery. 50%, that's statistically significant by any measure. So all healing comes from God. Find your creator again, find peace, don't operate in fear. Ultimately, that's where it's all going to come from. What I'm talking to you about is just common sense. I shouldn't use the word common sense because it is not common anymore. Uncommon sense that we can start applying some of these things and you will find terrific results. Now, going to the daily results, we have them backwards here. We have them where the last one added today is the one you see first. And then you go all the way down the list for all these weeks, 8 or 9 weeks, whatever we've been doing it. I'm going to go to the bottom and just run across a few things because I'm seeing things in the news. Like today, I saw somebody got cited in Texas. A doctor got cited in Texas for using ozone therapy, ozone hemotherapy on a patient. A doctor got cited for that. and they in the court documents, they call it a dangerous poisonous gas. Ozone has decades of safe and effective use. Decades. It is one of the safest things you can do. Ozone hemotherapy. In fact, I can tell you, I once had an ear infection, and usually I can get rid of any kind of thing like that in just a couple of days. But for a month, I couldn't. It was staying around. It seemed to go away almost, and then it come back. And so I went to a local doc here, and I went to his IV lab, and they gave me what's called ozone hemotherapy, where they literally take out a bag of blood, and then they mix it with ozone gas, and your blood becomes like vibrant red. It's really amazing. And then they hang it on the rack, and they put it back in, and they run you can do it with or without. Without is effective also, but running it through a UV ray, ultraviolet ray, light, before they put it in you, takes it to another level. And so within 5 minutes of beginning that therapy, I could feel my ear infection quenching, literally quenching. Now, that had to be a viral infection because all the things I did for bacterial infection didn't help. But the point is, it went away, one treatment, and I've never dealt with it again. Never dealt with it before or since. So there's so many reasons to do IV ozone. I mean, it was good I remember back in the Ebola crisis, I talked to some of the health ministers in Sierra Leone and told them about ozone. In fact, ozone had been in their country healing the health workers, and the government made them take it out of the country. It was actually working. See, ozone is not a poisonous gas. Of course, too much could be poisonous, but too much water can kill you also. So ozone is a very effective positive treatment. UV is a very effective positive treatment. We've been talking about those from the beginning. Colloidal silver, you're hearing about companies getting rated now because they're selling colloidal silver to people for corona. Colloidal silver is antiviral. There's one doc told me about this way to do it, and I've tried this. It's really amazing, is that you get the steam, what's it called? The asthmatics use this for asthma medicine. I'll think of it in a minute. But make it aerosol, really make it steam. And so you put silver in there instead of the medicine, and you breathe it in, and it will neutralize virus in your lungs. It is a pretty amazing therapy that works during cold or flu, and it has to even work during coronavirus also. I'm not trying to tell you it's a cure, but there's no downside to that. That's what I'm trying to say. So using that in your nose, I talked about in your mouth, gargling with it, in your breathing it is a very good thing. So there's a lot of things that right now are getting a lot of negative press because they are non-pharmaceutical treatments. See, pharmaceutical treatments are what people expect. They think this has to have a pharmaceutical solution. But pharmaceutical solutions haven't worked with the exception of chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. And so there's now a major attempt to discredit hydroxychloroquine, even though the top virologist in France has declared, I don't know, maybe 4 weeks ago, that the coronavirus is dead because we have the solution, which is hydroxychloroquine. And so there are even studies where they're trying to show there's a problem with it, so they stopped the study after saying it had cardiac side effects. Folks, we've had this drug for 70 years treating malaria and even arthritis. So to start talking about it having cardiac side effects now, it really makes no sense, okay? But what chloroquine does is just so unique is, I talked about how the virus works. I never got to this part, so I'll tell you. The virus, once it gets past the where it settles in the throat and all the places I talked about, and then it goes in the system, and then through the ACE2 port, the virus wraps itself in cellular material to hide from your immunity, and then makes its way inside the cell through the ACE2 port or ACE2 receptor, and inside the cell, the virus hijacks the cellular replication system. So there's a system inside for what's called cellular apoptosis. That means the cell divides on its own and dies, divides and dies, divides and dies. That happens over a lifetime. That happens with 6 cells, that the body will kill cells that way with cellular apoptosis. But this replication machine, it becomes hijacked by viruses, which are not living things. They are genetic material. And it becomes hijacked, and instead of replicating the cell, now it replicates the virus. So this is where the viral load starts to increase and where people get in trouble. So the cell is creating more and more and more and more viruses till the cell gets killed, and then the viruses are let out into the system to attack other cells. So this is the way it works with viruses. That would be SARS or corona or cold or flu. That's the way it works. So hydroxychloroquine opens the door to allow zinc in the cell. And see, you find some hydroxychloroquine studies who don't seem to be very effective. Now, I've looked at some of these studies. Now, they would have 3 groups of patients. One's hydroxychloroquine by itself, one hydroxychloroquine plus Z-Pak antibiotic, and then one with nothing. And and then they compared the 3. But the one that had a really low level treatment was a group of barely infected people. But the 2 groups with hydroxychloroquine plus Z-Pak were people in dire straits. So this was a retrospective study where they literally cherry-picked patient files and came up with a study saying it doesn't work. But this is really badly developed. Again, there's a major effort out there to discredit hydroxychloroquine. Now, I'm not a drug fan in any way, but if one works, I'm going to tell you it works. And what we've seen now through numerous studies in China, in France, in New York, one doctor has now done more than 700 patients without a death. 700 patients using hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak plus zinc. Now, why is zinc important? We talked about zinc needs to get into the cell. And what happens is hydroxychloroquine opens the door for zinc to get in the cell, but most people are zinc deficient. So there's no zinc to get put into the cell. So the door is open and nothing has happened. That's why you see the hydroxychloroquine by itself may or may not work depending on the status of the nutrition status of the patient. Isn't that amazing? So when you think about that, so the elements used in New York with a guy that has 700 plus patients and also in France is it's hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak plus zinc sulfate. And this is a recipe that has worked over and over again, sometimes within hours of being administered. So these deficiencies, zinc deficiency, I saw a study and I posted in this blog that zinc deficiency combined with the flu presents almost identical to COVID-19. So when you're talking about zinc deficiency and regular flu presents like COVID-19, now you start to see the power of nutrition in all of this. I talked about being properly nutrified. It is game number 1. You got to figure out how to get all the essential vitamins, minerals, amino acids, fatty acids, polyphenolic compounds, omega fatty acids, on and on and on. There are multiple minerals, multiple trace elements. All these things are required to be on board for you to be protected with your own immunity, to keep from getting sick, or if you are sick, to get well quickly. It's super important. So these are on the list. If you're going to try to take something, now, first of all, you got to cover the foundation. I'm assuming you got your foundation covered, taking your living fuel, whatever you're taking, but make sure that you're covering all those bases. And then what else might you take? Vitamin D3, very important. Vitamin C, very important. Iodine, very important. And zinc. These are primary things that one could take to be protective. But if you think you're going to protect yourself just taking a few supplements without covering the bases, then you are mistaken. It might work for you, but I wouldn't take the risk. So these are very important things that we all need to know. And a lot of these things we talked about, in fact, we talked about all the ones that we talked about here in this blog, and I want you to go read it because it will edify you. It'll give you a lot of hope. And so I'm looking here and see what else you might want to know about at the moment. But here we are. Spirulina found to boost the body's type 1 interferon response to fight RNA viral infections. COVID-19 is an RNA virus. SARS was an RNA virus. I mean, folks, if you're waiting around for a vaccine, please keep in mind we've had multiple pandemics that are SARS virus, that are COVID viruses that have been really big problematic in the world. But to date, we've never had a single vaccine that has been effective. Not a single one. Because these things, they mutate. Now, I posted a study here that said that this virus has already mutated, documented 122 times. That means if you started a vaccine based on the first iteration, and by the time you go to study it, it's now at 122nd iteration, your vaccine is not likely to work. And that's what happens with the flu virus. That the flu virus is a problem. The flu vaccine is a problem because every year a bunch of smart people get in a room and they decide what 2 flu strains they're going to guess are going to show up in what iteration? In other words, how many times has it mutated? So the following year in a certain place in the world or in the U.S., let's say in New York City, what are we going to guess is going to be the iteration and the viral strain, and then we're going to put it together this year for next year. That's why the CDC's own documentation shows that even the flu virus, the flu vaccine itself, has been barely effective even at treating the seasonal flu. That's because it's almost impossible to pick which one you're going to try to protect for a year into the future. So this is a major problem. The other problem is that the flu shot itself increases or decreases your immunity, the person who gets its immunity, the year they get it and even subsequent years. So it's going to be a hit on your immunity. So I wouldn't take the flu virus in the COVID season because that'll increase your risk of getting COVID. It will reduce your immunity. And so we've got to be careful about that. The flu virus is 0% effective against COVID-19. And even the CDC will tell you that. So waiting for a vaccine when you realize that these pandemics have happened before with coronaviruses and they've never come up with a vaccine, and the vaccine tests actually have injured people and killed people so badly that there still exist lawsuits against the makers of those vaccines, even though you're not supposed to be allowed to sue vaccine manufacturers because of the 1986 law, but that's a story for another day. So I'll continue here. I talked about sugar and immunity, talked about carbohydrates harm our immune system. Junk food upsets the immune system. I mean, folks, what you eat matters. When you eat matters. Sleeping, it all matters. So I have my super immunity nutrition recommendations here for cancer. I'm not talking about cancer today, but the same immunity recommendations matter for all sorts of issues health-wise. And immunity and importance of avoiding sugar, we talked about that again. Talked about superfood nutrition is critical. Again, getting everything you need is super important for your immunity to be where it needs to be. So we have here the role of nutrition in viral disease. Study shows viral mutation due to nutrition deficiency. In other words, nutrition deficiencies like a zinc deficiency makes the virus more dangerous. There's a study here that shows exactly that. It says study shows viral mutation due to nutrition deficiency. This is happening, folks. Poor nutrition builds deadlier viruses. Another study here in infection control today. So selenium deficiency behind Ebola, it said, behind AIDS and other deadly infections. And you can be sure that includes SARS-CoV-2, which we're dealing with now. And selenium and viral infections. There's a lot of things about selenium. Host nutrition status and its effect on viral pathogenesis. Again, that's the Journal of Infectious Disease. This is not from just wacky sources. These are the journals that doctors are supposed to be reading. So we continue here. Also, susceptibility to coronavirus. So susceptibility is another thing that immunity matters on. It isn't just if you're going to get sick if you actually have it. Are you going to even contract it in the first place? Here I got ozone, and I got ozone devices, UV lights, all the stuff here that we talked about. President Trump the other day talked about UV light potentially being an answer. You know, what's important to know is if you have an Ebola patient who is extremely infectious, let's just say the Ebola is 40% lethal. Say the patient dies in the room, and then they take the patient to the morgue. How in the world are they going to sterilize the room? They use two things, at least one of two things. They use ozone and UV. So if the hospitals know to use ozone and UV to sterilize a room to put a fresh patient in, then obviously it has some effect on virus and a dramatic effect at that. So the other thing is now convalescent blood from people who have recovered. So initially they said if you have coronavirus, you could probably get it again. We don't know that. They say if you have it again, you're not immune, so you could get it again. So you still have to take all the precautions and so on. But the truth is that it wasn't long after that they were actually taking blood from people who recovered from coronavirus and giving it to people who had coronavirus and they were recovering. Now there's been multiple studies on that now. It's called convalescent plasma, and this is an effective strategy. one of the problems with convalescent strategy is the convalescent blood strategy is that they have a thing called asymptomatic carrier. They say that the people have been tested positive, but they don't have any symptoms. This is true, I'm sure, out there, but I think it's being inflated a lot because the test called the polymerase chain reaction test is a horrible test. If you test positive, there's a good chance you have a false positive. If you test negative, you got a good chance you have a false negative. And even if it is positive and it's a true positive, the true positives are outweighed by false positive 5-1. So you don't know if you're sick, you can still be quarantined. And what are they doing? They're looking for RNA virus. They're looking for COVID-2. That's what they're looking for, SARS-CoV-2. And when they find SARS-CoV-2, you're automatically called COVID positive or corona positive, and then asked to quarantine. But the problem is it's the same RNA virus used for the cold and the flu. So if they find this, it could be cold, could be flu, could be nothing. So what they're doing is amplifying a lab test. So if you're having a runny nose, they take some mucus and they amplify the lab test times 2, times 2, times 2, times 2, times 2. And theoretically, if they multiply it 20 times, few people would be sick. If they multiply it 50 times, most people might be sick because the amplification is on order of magnitude higher because when you're doubling. So the point here is that even if they find the SARS-CoV-2, they still haven't determined if you're actively sick, if you have been sick, if you were ever sick, because this is not too uncommon a virus, and you're just finding RNA material from a virus. Has nothing to do with the viral load of the patient or whether the patient's immunity has already taken care of it or the patient is gonna take care of it. So what I'm hearing here as I talk to people, I talked to Del Bigtree just a few minutes ago, and he is talking to a lot of scientists. Del Bigtree, the High Wire, I recommend you watching that. I post some of his stuff, but he talked about a lot of things out there, but mostly is that nobody in integrative medicine that I know or he knows is any concern about dying from COVID-2 or COVID-19 because immunity handles it. And real immunity comes from being exposed to these things like measles and those sort of things. I mean, this whole measles outbreak, first of all, measles doesn't kill people. So if you have a measles outbreak, what's the big deal? But one of the things that wasn't talked about when they talked about the measles outbreak is that when people receive a measles vaccine, they become asymptomatic carriers oftentimes. And that means they're walking around not knowing they're sick with the measles, but they're spreading the measles like at Disney a couple of years ago that you heard about that made such a big deal about. So it's not all as clear as it might look, but there are a lot of things to look at. And there's a lot of people out there that believe that we ought to be like Sweden. I spoke to my brother-in-law in Sweden just a couple hours ago, and he talked about how the mistake made in Sweden was that they basically did not lock down the old folks' homes and convalescent homes, those sort of things. They didn't lock those down at all because they just didn't know to. They didn't have to wear masks and gloves and all that sort of thing when they're dealing with the old folks. And so they got infected. And so way too late, they started that. But even still, their numbers are not terrible. They're similar to California and not too dissimilar from a neighboring Norway or even Denmark. And those places locked down. So their strategy probably, if they would have locked down the elderly, might have been more effective, but they have achieved near herd immunity now in their culture because people have been exposed and now are immune and don't have to deal with it again. In America, in the countries that lock down, we lock down, so we're exposed only to those people in our families and no ability. So what you have all these healthy people who are not going to get sick, who are home not getting exposed. Therefore, the society is not getting exposed to the virus to become immune to the virus. Therefore, we may be dealing with this again in the fall. I'm not saying we are or we're not, but I don't see what's going to stop it because immunity, again, is the key. So I continue. Here's the 17th of March, talks about chloroquine confirmed effective as coronavirus cure. We talked about that and that adding zinc is a critical element to that. It's a really fantastic thing, but there is an effort out there to discredit hydroxychloroquine because it is a 70-year-old drug and really not bringing any profits to the drug companies. Now, there's a lot of people trying to put their hopes in a vaccine for the future, But again, they have not had a vaccine for a coronavirus that's successful yet. So I think expecting that anytime in the near future or ever is a pipe dream. So when you talk about homeopathics, homeopathic is called homeoprophylaxis. First told to me by Robert Scott Bell, and then by Dr. Lee Cowden. Dr. Lee Cowden actually told Dr. Robert Scott Bell. So fascinating is, he gave me some research. It's fascinating. It is the approach that India has taken out in other countries. India is using homeoprophylaxis because there wasn't a vaccine. And so they basically did their whole population to have some really good results with that. Brazil has used it against tuberculosis and against other really terrible pandemics in Brazil in history in the 1970s, in the 1980s, and others. There's really good research on homeoprophylaxis. It's something that our government needs to be looking into, since there is no downside whatsoever. We could be giving it to everybody in America. It's very cheap, and it is very effective according to history, as history tells us, because we're not using live virus. We're using actually the frequency of live virus and the frequencies around it, so it covers any changes in the virus over time. So homeoprophylaxis, I have a lot of posts on that here, a lot of studies on that. It's very impressive, and it doesn't have any of the negative things that are put into vaccines that are like mercury or aluminum or aborted fetal cells, formaldehyde, all kinds of crazy stuff that you would never put in your system. Homeoprophylaxis has none of that. So it's something that we really need to take a hard look at. It's a really impressive treatment. So I'm going to continue here and see what else I need to bring to your attention. But you're going to come here and read this, I hope. So why are deaths from coronavirus so high in Italy? It's very interesting because one of the things I posted here is from Dr. Charles Simone. Dr. Charles Simone is a very impressive man with a long resume. And he's very smart, and he discovered that there are medications that most people over 60 are currently on: ACE inhibitors, ibuprofen, other diabetes medications, other things. There are certain medications that people are on that dramatically increase the probability of death if one receives or gets the coronavirus. And these medicines, he is listed, and I have this on my posts here, he's listed medicines that are alternative to these medicines. So if you're taking a medicine for high blood pressure, there's an alternative medicine that does the same thing, that does not carry the risk of death with coronavirus that these other meds do. So there's a whole list that you can just hand to your doctor if you're taking them, or if your parents are taking them. You come here, you get the list, and you look at their list, you say, if they're on this drug, you call their doctor immediately and ask them to change to the other drugs on the list. A simple little thing. Well, he basically said the reason old people are dying from coronavirus is the meds that they are taking. And those are the meds I'm talking about on this list. That is important. He is convinced that everybody, every doctor needs to have this information, that these drugs are causing people to die when they receive this COVID-19, because COVID-19 enters the cell through the ACE2 portals, and so does some of these drugs. So it causes more ACE2 on the cell, which causes problems, and these drugs cause people to get injured and die. So it's very important that we come look at this list and do what we can to get our loved ones off of these meds. So that's one of the reasons people in Italy have died. The other thing is that old people are more susceptible in general. In addition to the meds, their immunity is weaker. Sometimes these people are really old. In fact, in Italy, 79.5 years was the average age of death in Italy. So that tells you something. So it's about 1% death rate there. Some people say it's higher. It depends on how you tabulate the people that are sick. But we won't go into that detail. But the point is, that was a big problem over there, and a lot of unhealthy people. And the way people are treated, there's no standard for. So keep that in mind. It isn't like you go to the hospital and you get a vitamin C IV, because there's hospitals in New York now doing that, and have extraordinary benefits with their patients in New York by using vitamin C IVs when they first come in. So 3,000 milligrams initially, 3,000 milligrams later. And so these things are making, if every patient was put on vitamin C IVs, I believe their death rate would plummet. Now, there's another problem with the death rate, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the point is, if you had a standard that says you will use 600 milligrams of hydroxychloroquine, you'll use however many milligrams of Z-Pak, and you'll use however many 50 milligrams of zinc, and you'll do that for 7 days, and it has enormous positive effect, but they still haven't decided a standard of care. So each person is being treated differently. Now, the way patients were treated also contributed to the death rate in Italy and France and US and other places in the world. The way they treated people was that they would get them to the point where they had respiratory problems. They would move them onto, instead of using a mild respirator like a CPAP or a BiPAP machine, which is oxygenating, similar to what you wear if you had a sleep apnea. But if they didn't want to use those masks because they said they were afraid of making the virus an aerosol into the room and getting other people sick. So they bypassed that step and they put them on respirators, ventilators. Ventilators have a tube down into the lung, and this is very hard. It damages the lung, very hard on the patients. And now we're finding about 90% of the people put on ventilators actually passed away. So ventilators are dangerous, and it is not the way to treat it. One other article I read talked about how a emergency room physician in New York, he talked about how this is not pneumonia. He said everybody's treating this like pneumonia, and they've been talking about it being a pneumonia flu, but the truth is it is respiratory distress disorder, advanced respiratory distress disorder. So if you actually have a patient that is needing oxygen, it's like if we dropped you on top of a mountain without acclimating you, you wouldn't be able to get air, no air in your blood and no air in your lungs, and you would actually be needing oxygen. So the point here is, if you go on a respirator, usually they set it for pneumonia at 50% oxygen, but on respiratory distress disorder, you really probably need 80% oxygen because you're basically starving for air. And so literally the ventilator has been killing people unnecessarily, potentially because of the fear of making the virus aerosol. But don't get on a ventilator. Get yourself on an IV. Make sure your doctors, your family, loved ones get you. If your hospital will do it, put them on a vitamin C IV. In China, they had a successful study where they did patients for 7 days that were newly infected on 10,000 IU a day IV, and the ones that were severely infected, they did 20,000 IU a day IV, and after 7 days, they had no deaths whatsoever. So vitamin C is an effective treatment, even though they're coming down on vitamin C here. Remember, well-meaning doctors were not trained in clinical nutrition. They have never been, and it's a pharmaceutical approach. Drugs or surgery, that is the primary way that they do things. And so to see doctors come all the way around to vitamin C IVs, to zinc, to other nutritional approaches is very encouraging, and we hope this sticks. There was no pharmaceutical alternative now except for hydroxychloroquine, and that is best when you combine it with zinc. So that's an important thing to look at and to talk about. And so these are, again, very important things. And I'm going to just see what else here that you might want to know about at the moment. Well, I'm only up to March 20th. Successful high-dose vitamin C. In fact, my computer just died. So the net of it is that vitamin C is something that's really important. Zinc is something really important. I've even heard aerosol ginkgo. They did aerosol ginkgo and healed some patients. So there's a lot of approaches, a lot of treatments that are non-pharmaceutical that should be looked at. But right now, I'm encouraging our government to settle on a protocol. A patient comes in and they're mildly infected. They start them immediately on IV vitamin C, maybe IV zinc also. And then if they need further treatment, hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak, and zinc, and put them on CPAP or respirators and not ventilators. So these small little changes here in treating people can have an enormous effect. So I'm just trying to give you a general rundown here of a lot of the things that are going on from a health perspective that you may not be hearing about. And our desire is to give you hope. And there's a lot of things to be hopeful about. So please come to livingfuel.com, click on the red banner at the top, and read at least my comments on the myriad, dozens and dozens and dozens of posts daily. We put stuff up there that is important for your life. I really hope this was helpful for you. We're going to keep coming out and bringing you more stuff, and going to keep posting daily on the blog. God bless you, and have an amazing day.